Tom, talking about the 2024 election, this is on your website. There are several lawsuits that Judicial Watch is involved in for 2024. You can see it here on judicialwatch.org. Judicial Watch sues Illinois to force cleanup of voting rolls. Judicial Watch sues Mississippi for counting absentee ballots after Election Day, and it goes on. Tell us about why you're doing those lawsuits. What do you hope to gain from that?
Well, the first lawsuit is about Illinois, and we've had many lawsuits like that over the years to clean up election rolls. Federal law requires states to take reasonable steps to clean up election rolls, and that isn't taking place in Illinois. They're not cleaning up the rolls, and what we do is we look at the data, and they report the data about their cleanups, and we say, well, it's practically speaking zero for many counties in Illinois. In many counties, it looks like they haven't removed dead people for years, for instance. So it's that basic work. And what's very interesting about the litigation that we previously pursued is that in jurisdictions like New York City, we were in a battle with them, and they settled. They removed almost 500,000 names. L.A. County, they settled with us. They removed 1.2 million names. It was announced at the beginning of last year. So there's a lot of election roll cleanup, and it's really essential because A, the law requires it, and B, when you're mailing ballots in a more widespread fashion than has been typical, I think it's really important that the rolls be accurate and ineligible voters not remain on the rolls. Well,
let's talk, just before we take calls, I want to show you this clip from Washington Journal. Last month, we had data specialist and author Ken Block on the program to talk about his hiring by the Trump campaign to investigate 2020 election voter fraud claims. So here it is, and then I'll get your reaction.
Well, so I didn't say there was no voter fraud. What I told them there wasn't enough voter fraud to matter, and that's an important distinction. Mm-hmm. We did find some dead voters. We did find some duplicate voters, but the numbers were far less than the thousands, many thousands that were necessary inside the swing states. And I was very transparent as we discussed the challenges with having access to some data and not having access to other data. I can pretty confidently say that the Trump attorneys that I reported to, specifically Alex Cannon, who was my main contact, had a lot of confidence in the work that I was doing, in the fact that I was being as thorough as I was, and I was probably numbing his brain with how much information I was educating him about voter data and the processes that I was going through. I know he trusted my results, and he communicated very thoroughly to Mark Meadows at the end of the day that the campaign looked extraordinarily hard at not only looking for fraud, but evaluating everyone else's claims of fraud. And we found nothing that rose to the level of changing an election result that would survive legal scrutiny in court.
What do you think of that, Tom?
Well, I don't understand what he's saying in the sense that there were there was litigation that was going on in Georgia, for instance, by the Trump campaign, that if it was pursued and the allegations were borne out, would have changed the results of the election in Georgia. So I don't think that's the full picture of what was going on within the Trump campaign. There were ongoing cases by the Trump campaign itself that were never fully litigated because the time ran out. And secondly, it's not just voter fraud per se, it's changing the rules in a way where votes that shouldn't have been counted are counted, or they were counted in a way that was contrary to federal law in the sense of counting well after Election Day, or without the security in place that would have reassured people that the election was done correctly.
And you think that there are enough of those fraudulent votes to have changed the outcome of the election?
I think that there were enough questions about the way the elections were run and in the key swing states that it was a jump ball as to whether the outcome that was certified was actually correct. And if I were running things, I would have done do-overs in those key states. That's the solution that judges have had when there are issues related to election fraud and the rule breaking, and that would have been within the purview of the courts and, frankly, the state legislatures if they wanted to be aggressive enough to reassure people that the election was fair and honest. I mean, we've had just cases in the last year. I think it was in Connecticut. Was it Bridgeport? But you know, your listeners can Google it up and get it right rather than relying on my memory, where a court said we're going to have a new election. So there are all sorts of ways to solve this, and you know, there's a good reason why 80% of Republicans, it looks like, don't believe the election results were accurate.
So part of the way that, I mean, the way that we solve it in this country is to litigate it in the courts, and there were 60 court cases.
Well, I mean, you know, you could have
that went against former President Trump. Do you not believe the results of those cases?
I mean, you know, that's a number that's used by Democrats and the left to disguise the substantive concerns that were being pursued by the Trump campaign and others. And you know, you could have someone on the street corner file a lawsuit and be part of that 60 cases. There were a half a dozen cases pursued by the Trump campaign that were cut short. There was a refusal by the Supreme Court to take up the substantive challenge, for instance, by Texas, challenging the processes in the other states under the Constitution. So there were a lot of substantial issues that weren't thrown out on the merits, but in some cases they were told it was too soon prior to the election, and then it was told, in many cases, they were told it was too late after the election. So this was a political fight about a political outcome that occurred in the courts.